Next is our fireside chat on the cyber strategy post-corona with Michal Braverman-Blumenstyk, Microsoft Corporate Vice President, CTO Cloud and AI Security, and Israel R&D Center General Manager, and Mark Russinovich, Microsoft Corporate Vice President and Chief Technology Officer, Microsoft Azure.
Hi, Mark. It's really great to see you. I wish we could do it in person. I really miss meeting you guys in person, but this is better than nothing. And I'm really, really happy that you join us in this session.
Well, thanks for having me. I wish I could be in Israel. I was there a few years ago and it was a fantastic time. I look forward to returning again at some point.
Great.
So, Michal, why don't we start with talking about COVID-19 and the changes in everything, the way that people are doing everything and how that's impacted cybersecurity.
Sure. So first of all, obviously COVID-19 caught the world in surprise. And all of a sudden, from one day to another, many companies had to start working from home. Not all the companies were equipped security-wise and cybersecurity-wise to work from home. And obviously, because of all these masses that started to work from home, and not all of them were protected in the right way, the cyber criminals saw it as an opportunity. As we know, they're always looking, the criminals are always looking for opportunity. And therefore, the fact that so many people started working at home was like a gold mine for all the attackers. And they start attacking many people, many companies that weren't ready for that. Another thing that happened is that the hospitals all of a sudden were full with COVID-19 patients, and they were very busy. And obviously the criminals saw it an opportunity. They are not ethical. They don't care that people are dying and suffering. And they knew that the hospitals are very vulnerable. And they leveraged that vulnerability in order to attack hospitals, because hospitals would pay anything when their respirators and other life support engines are going down because of ransomware. And the unethical criminals used it and attacked hospitals in many ways. Another thing that we saw increase in attacks is phishing attacks. And this is very common when there is a sort of a global storm like COVID-19. So whenever people saw email with COVID-19 on top of that, they didn't think twice and they forgot anything they knew about being careful for phishing attack, and they pressed the link, and obviously they were victims of a phishing attacks. So because of and this is just few examples. So because of the COVID-19, there were many attacks. We saw a dramatic increase. We saw in a matter of fact, 241 countries reported increase in attacks, and most of them due to the COVID-19. Another thing which COVID-19 affected the world is that now we are doing anything from remote. Childcare, but mostly healthcare, delivery. We leverage, the industry leverage robotics and drones in delivery. And this is a phenomena that we start seeing, but it will, which is a great phenomena. However, it will increase the exposure of all those remote services into to cyber attacks. So with the fact that we really like those directions, we have to make sure that we protect our customers, and the customers are aware that all those increased remote services are also calling the criminals in order to attack them. Another thing which is related to that is the increase, and again, due to the remote working and to the fact that everybody is working from home, the increase of usage of IoT and OT. And this is again, it makes everybody more productive. However, this is also something that we as Microsoft have to defend them, increase our defense. And one of the things that we did, and this is actually in the midst of COVID-19, we acquired a new startup, CyberX, which their specialty is giving protection to IoT, specifically to OT. And this also helps us in order to protect the people who are, the companies that are using all those IoT and OT devices, including nuclear powers, etc. Now, I will ask you a question, Mark.
Okay.
Okay. So, Mark, how do you think that COVID-19 is affecting the digital transformation? Obviously, the digital transformation is very important to Microsoft and to our customers. So what is the effect of COVID-19 on the digital transformation?
It's been pretty dramatic. I think Satya himself talks about the fact that as the world started to go to lockdown, we saw 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months from our customers. And that digital transformation was accelerated because, of course, everybody going home and having to work from home, which just promoted the use of automation and moving to the cloud. In fact, many of our customers actually accelerated the migrations to the cloud because working from home put stresses on their own networks and their own infrastructure. And so to relieve that, they started to migrate workloads to the cloud. We saw just a tremendous increase in cloud-based services that relate to working and learning from home. For example, Azure VPN, we saw a 700% increase in VPN client downloads in March. We saw 100% growth in connections to Azure VPN. We saw 40x peak traffic growth on our WAN. We saw, when it comes to Traffic Manager, we saw 46% month-over-month growth in the months of January through March, which is when, as the world was locking down. Teams, people are probably pretty familiar with the massive growth we saw in Teams, going from 32 million users to 75 million users just in the course of a month and a half in the early spring timeframe. And then when it came to security services, this is where we also saw a dramatic rise in use of security services. We saw 30% growth in authentication requests on Azure Active Directory. And then when it comes to working from home, a lot of users go to this zero trust model. They're accessing corporate resources now, their applications from home. And we've got services, for example, like Azure Active Directory application proxy. We saw 100% increase in global traffic as the world locked down. We saw 40% increase in monthly active users. In Cloud App Security, which is a service that brokers accesses to cloud services and performs security and authentication checks on them, we saw 100% month-over-month growth. So just all across the board, we saw this dramatic shift towards the cloud. We saw financial companies migrating their workforces onto Windows Virtual Desktop, which had 3x growth in over a course of a month. So yeah, massive impact on digital transformation acceleration. And going along with that, just acceleration of the zero trust model that we've been talking about now for a few years. Going from assume breach to when you're assuming breach, you can't trust anything. So you want to verify not just the user, but you want to verify the endpoint the user's coming from. You want to verify the health of that endpoint and whether it has the right policies applied to it. And all through the chain of connections, this zero trust model, which says we don't necessarily trust the security posture of this endpoint, of this service. So let's verify it ahead of time before we allow it access to data.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And actually not surprising, because to me, COVID-19 is like a war. As a matter of fact, like the World War. And if you think about it, the world as you know, I'm a history buff, and the world in 1945 was much different than the world in 1939. because there were acceleration of technology. And I think we are going through a very similar period where because of this very extreme situation with COVID-19, the technology is being accelerated. And that's exactly what we see, the acceleration of the digital transformation. So I'm very optimistic that at the end, the world will be a better place for many reasons. And
and you know what I think, Michal, is also in some senses, COVID's been a horrible, horrible thing, but in some senses we were lucky about when it struck, because just 10 years ago, from a technology perspective and from an infrastructure perspective, I don't think the world would have been able to respond to it in the way that it has today. Imagine we didn't have the network bandwidth and the network connectivity. We didn't have the cloud services that we do today to enable people to shift from going into the office to actually doing everything completely remotely and actually being very productive at it.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, it took us one day in Microsoft to decide to move, all of our workforce to work from home, and productivity didn't even go down. Of course, people miss to see each other, but we continue to work as usual because of all the technology that you said, and of course, because we are so ready from security point of view to secure our remote workers. So I have another question for you, Mark. What is the role? What is the role of the cloud post COVID-19, and what are the challenges and opportunities that you see?
Well, I think that the role of the cloud is post-19 is what it was pre-COVID-19. Though I think that one of the things that people have realized is that the cloud is actually great at dealing with unforeseen circumstances like COVID. If you take a look at the scaling that I talked about, we could add tens of terabits of capacity to our network infrastructure in the matter of weeks. And that is something that most enterprises just simply aren't equipped to do. And like I mentioned, a lot of enterprises started to shift to the cloud just because they couldn't deal with the increased demand on their own resources as their users started to work from home. So I think it highlighted for people really some of the value of the cloud. The fact that the cloud is so elastic, the fact that we've got systems that are in place to scale the way that we've got, the way that we do. And from a security perspective, if you take a look at some of the security services I mentioned that scaled and the usage that and the defenses that they're providing to customers, one of them that we haven't really talked about is Sentinel, which is a cloud-based SIEM that it really underlies the entire Azure security infrastructure. And that is a place where we aggregate signals ourselves coming from all our different services, but where customers can also bring their own signals and aggregate them with all of those other signals to really get deep insights and apply machine learning. So again, I think that it's not that the value proposition of the cloud has changed. I think that it's become more clear for people what the cloud value proposition is.
I agree. And if you talked about Sentinel and also our XDR, I think and this is really important because of COVID-19 and what we talked before about the proliferation of IoT and the combination of OT, operational technology and information technology, and the fact that products like Sentinel gives an end-to-end solution, because attack can start anywhere. It can start from the IT side where the information resides. It can migrate by lateral movement and reach the operational part, and vice versa. And that's why we in Microsoft make sure that we have all those pieces together, including defending operation technology, again, here where CyberX is coming into play, and it's all connected via Sentinel in order to give this complete end-to-end solution. So I think that I feel that we are doing a lot in order to make sure that we tie everything together, and we are not only we don't see COVID-19 as a threat to the technology, as a threat to humanity, but we leverage all the technology in order to give a better protection.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that again, highlighting the power of the cloud, the very low cost, very scalable storage systems that we've got, and the elastic compute that we can put on top of that, which is, and the fact that, does it make sense to bring the signals from all of the cloud services you're using back to your on-premises environment, where you've got to build out that storage infrastructure and that compute infrastructure, or take advantage of where the center of gravity for a lot of this is, which is the cloud, and then bring the data to the cloud, where it's going to be low cost, a lot lower cost typically than what you can achieve on premises. Plus, you can aggregate the signals across everything, Office 365, Azure Active Directory, Azure itself, your cloud-based systems, on-prem based systems, and like you mentioned, even IoT systems that are pumping data directly into the cloud without having to go to your corporate network first and ending up in the SIM in Sentinel.
Yeah. And I think here also, not only the intelligent cloud, also the intelligent edge plays a very important role, because obviously the world is still hybrid. So with the intelligent edge, we are able to leverage the advantage of the cloud and the ubiquitous of the cloud, but also taking care of things that are that are still on premise with the intelligent edge. So we get both worlds.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question that that I would like to ask you is how you touched it a little bit, but I want to focus specifically more. Is how can organization leverage the power of the cloud in order to get better protection, in addition to the things that you mentioned before?
Yeah, well, so we talked about Sentinel. We talked about the use of cloud services like Cloud App Security and other cloud-based services from Microsoft and other companies that can sit and watch traffic and then apply enhanced security to that traffic. But one of the, I think, value propositions when it comes to the cloud and the cloud compute across massive lakes of data, which in this case, we're talking about security signals, billions or trillions of them in the case of Microsoft, is the use of machine learning or artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. Because I think once you get to that kind of scale, and the kind of scale that this digital transformation that the world has really been undergoing over the last decade or 2 decades, just getting more and more digital, more and more signals, to the point where humans just cannot analyze even individual incidents anymore, because it's just overwhelming, the amount of noise once you start talking about that number of signals. And you really need to apply something that is intelligent, not just your kind of old rules-based models, which attackers figure out how to break very instantly. Anybody that works in the fraud space like you did knows that attackers pretty quickly figure out the heuristics or rules that you've got and break them. What it is a cat and mouse game. And the way to keep ahead of that cat and mouse game is to have systems that are learning from the way that the attackers are behaving and adjusting themselves as they go. And so that is where machine learning comes into play. And we've been using machine learning for cybersecurity domains for many years now at Microsoft, and just applying it in more and more places and getting more and more sophisticated. If you talk about Azure Active Directory Identity Protection, for example, the machine learning that we apply that is it's leveraging the aggregate behaviors of all of Microsoft customers, but then also on top of that aggregated behaviors, looking at the individual behaviors of a corporation and their users in that corporation to identify anomalous logins. This person is typically logging in from Tel Aviv, and now they're logging in from Boston. Is that something that is unusual or not? And with the machine learning algorithms that we've got in place, we can flag that as anomalous with very high confidence, and so that you're not getting a lot of noise where it might be that person's in a group, that other users in that group are constantly traveling to Boston, and so it's natural that they would be doing that. So it's not really anomalous versus it is. The only way to really understand that is by constantly learning, because the group's changing, and a few months they're in Boston, the next few months they're in Paris, and so the system, if you're dealing with humans having to put the rules on top of that, you're just not going to be able to keep up. But now with Sentinel, you get the ability to apply machine learning algorithms to your own data and the aggregated data that comes from all of the signals that get put into Azure Sentinel that you want to flow into it. And machine learning algorithms that come from us and Microsoft that we apply ourselves, as well as machine learning algorithms you can bring yourself. Integration with Jupyter Notebooks is one of the ways that you can very easily just start to explore. And that's the way to learn is to explore, apply some algorithms, see what they're giving you, and then refine them and go from there.
Mm-hmm. Right, fully agree with you. Now I'm going to ask you some quick questions. I obviously fully with you regarding the need for and the usage of AI and machine learning. But recently we see that also the criminals, you and I are technologists and engineers, but the other side also have very good technologists. And recently we see that the criminals are also not only leveraging AI in order to create better attacks, but they'll also try to fool AI-based systems, for example, by techniques like poisoning, by techniques like corruption, or even something which is very new. We all know about SQL injection, but now they're talking about AI injection. So can you share with us how the fact that we leverage the cloud and the AI infrastructure we have in the cloud can combat those types of sophisticated attacks?
Yeah, so this threats on machine learning has been something that has become more and more critical as we rely more and more on machine learning to protect ourselves. We've got a group at Microsoft that is focused on threats to machine learning. And like you mentioned, you touched on some of them, poisoning with injecting data, but then there are also services, they're applications. And if you get an attacker that gets into the application, then they can manipulate the answers directly, give bad answers. But even like the poisoning case, I mentioned identity protection, and you've been in the fraud business, which has leveraged machine learning techniques as well, is the attacker that is reverse engineering the algorithm by sending it data and looking at the responses. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, that is extracting the model. And we take a look at this, not just in the context of cybersecurity, but in the sense of IP for machine learning as well. As I've got a lot of IP in the algorithm, can somebody come along and feed it enough data that they can extract the parameters from the model or a rough representation of the model? In the case of cybersecurity, of course, that means if they can, then they can figure out how to circumvent the model and have it perform behaviors, for example, by performing certain movements in the network or creating certain noise in the network that causes it to say, this isn't an anomalous signal after all. And there's edge cases in these algorithms that they can exploit. So there's a lot of research going on right now in Microsoft, and we're working with MITRE as well as a bunch of other companies to come up with a threat matrix for machine learning algorithms, which include things like the poisoning attack that you mentioned, and reverse engineering the model, extracting the model as well. And then we're looking at ways to defend against that and also to detect it, because you can also potentially detect somebody trying to perform these activities by looking at the kinds of inputs that the model is getting as well. And that, of course, goes into Sentinel, and then you apply machine learning to that. So it's kind of a circular use of machine learning to detect machine learning attacks on machine learning and so on.
Yeah, exactly. So Mark, it was really great talking with you. And I'm told we are running out of time, even though I'm very happy to continue this very interesting discussion. So before we leave, is there anything else you want to say here? It will be an international crowd, but a lot of Israelis because this is an Israeli conference. So anything you want to say before we say goodbye?
I just think that security has become more important than ever, and we're also at this kind of inflection point when it comes to the use of technology for cybersecurity, and we haven't figured it out yet. We just touched on machine learning, for example, in cybersecurity, which is still, I would consider, in very nascent form, and it's just now that we're having this ability to aggregate and analyze data at massive scale that unlocks the potential of approaches like that. So I think that's a very exciting time to be in cybersecurity, and the world is really depending on cybersecurity professionals more than ever to defend ourselves as we become more and more dependent on digital technologies.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Mark. It was really, really great.
Thanks for calling.
And hope to see you soon in the same office.
Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye.